Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and it's summertime. Sort of. The weather dependable, but a lot of us will have summer holidays, so we want to bring you the best summer reads, the books that we truly think will make a difference to you this summer. Whether it's educational, motivational, or inspirational, we've got you covered.
Hello, welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us. In case you don't know, we have a business, Property Hub Invest, that sources over £100 million worth of property for our clients every year. You can find out about that at propertyhub.net/invest. And doing that, plus the podcast, keeps us pretty busy. But we do still occasionally find the time for a holiday. And when we do, we like to take a great book with us. So in this episode, you're going to hear about our current favourites and our all-time classics. A triple whammy of news stories for you this week. Let's see if we can get 3 quick stories in before we get going. First of all, as of the day you're listening to this, the King's Speech will have officially opened Parliament yesterday. And as part of the documents that are released alongside the speech, we may know a little bit more about their plans for reviving the Renters Reform Bill. So we will, of course, update you on the podcast about that one, but also keep an eye out for our newsletter, Property Pulse, on Friday, where we'll bring you that news first if there is some. So if you're not signed up to that already, you can do so at propertyhub.net/pulse. Also, the latest Rightmove house price index is out. It shows a very small fall last month, but really it's the regional picture that catches your attention again. We've talked about this north-south divide, and once again we're seeing prices increasing in the east of England, the northwest, the East Midlands, the northeast, with falls in London, the southwest and the southeast. And we'll have an episode over the next month or so digging into this regional pattern and how long it might last for. And finally, the Competition and Markets Authority have got their eye on sites that you use to find tradespeople like Checkatrade, MyBuilder and Rated People, because they say that these sites are not doing enough to vet traders in the first place and stay on top of fake reviews. The quote says, "We've seen worrying evidence suggesting people could be misled into thinking these sites actually check traders," which I suppose when you've got a site called Checkatrade doesn't seem unreasonable. But, finding good tradespeople is really hard, and I've personally found these sites pretty useful in the past. So if they are forced to up their game, I see that as good news. It's summertime. Well, England, that's debatable, but everywhere else it's summertime, which means it's time to book a flight, book literally anywhere with a kids club, and get some time to yourself by the pool with a good book. And if that's what your plans look like this summer, then we've got you sorted, because we've collated our essential summer reads. We're going to be sharing the books that we have enjoyed and got the most out of recently. But first, Rob, I think it is worth having a quick run through some classics, because if you haven't read these, you don't deserve to read any new books.
Wow, it's pretty brutal, Rob, but fair enough. Is this because your book's in this list?
Oh, mine's in there. Oh, I hadn't noticed.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so
these are all very important.
They are all very important, and they are true classics, and you should start with this list. We're not going to spend as much time on this. We have new books for you as well in this episode, but let's start off with the classics, and arguably maybe the classic of all investment books is Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. This book is a great starting place for anybody interested in creating wealth. And it's not focused particularly on property, although the lessons are so transferable. I think why this book lands so well is the way it's written. It's told in a story, and there's lots of debate whether this story was true or not, but it does not matter. There's lots of stories out there that aren't true. So take it for what it is. It's a book that teaches great lessons that land well. There's lots of controversy also around the author and how wealthy is he actually, and he went bankrupt once and everything else. Again, it doesn't matter. It's what you take out of the book. We have both read this book. We've read his other books. We've taken so much from this when we were starting out, so it's only right that we recommend it. And Rob, we took so much from this book that we decided to create a podcast on it.
Yes, we did. Episode 345. Rich Dad Poor Dad, 5 essential lessons and 2 important warnings. And the warnings are important because, as you've said, this book is not perfect. In fact, I did a post about this recently, saying that so much in this book is either wrong or outdated or exaggerated or dubious. But it doesn't matter, because it still provoked positive change in more people than probably any other book I can think of. And therefore, it is an absolute must. As is our next pick, which is Richer, Wiser, Happier by William Green. Rob, you were the first of us to discover this one, and it is fantastic because William spent a lot of time with a lot of very wealthy people. We're talking billionaires, the world's most successful investors, and digging into, yes, how they did it, but it's far more about the lifestyle and the mindset. And that's what makes this book so powerful for me. You get an insight into what makes very wealthy people tick and how their minds work. And that's really what investment is all about. Yes, you need to know the technical stuff and be a subject matter expert, but there's no point doing all that if you don't have the right mindset and the right attitude, but also know what you want and use your success to build the life you want, because a lot of the people profiled in this book had struggled with that. So that's our second classic pick, Richer, Wiser, Happier by William Green.
Another classic, and it is now, for me at least, a classic, is The Price of Money by who else but Rob Dix. And it's a great book. It is truly a great book. It's a Sunday Times bestseller, so it's not me being a nice co-host and friend. It truly is a brilliant book. And you need to understand how money works. You need to understand how inflation works. You need to understand the core rules. Because something that we said on the podcast for many, many years now, before the book was published, but this book does such a good job of explaining this, is that there are ways the world works, and they can make you poorer or they can make you wealthier. And you can take action to do the wealthier stuff. The system might not be fair, but the system exists. And this book helps you understand what is happening in the world, what is happening with money, and how it can make you richer or it can make you poorer. As I've said, it might not be fair, but understanding it puts you at an advantage because most people don't understand it. And I think what Rob has done here is explained it in a way where everybody can understand it. It's one of those books that you read yourself, but then you pass on to others to help them. Because if you can understand how money works, then you are in an incredible position. So that's why it makes it a classic. That's why it makes our list. Essential summer read, Price of Money by the lovely Rob D.
That's very kind, thank you. Now for our next classic, I've got a confession. I said that if you hadn't read all these classics, you didn't deserve to read any new books. I haven't read this one. I haven't read The Richest Man in Babylon. So Rob, I need to go and read this like this week before this episode goes out, so I'm not a hypocrite. But until I've done that, maybe you can give us a summary of what makes this a classic.
I cannot believe you've not read this. I don't think that anything that you're going to read now, Rob, is going to be like, oh, wow, that's a brand new game changer. But for me, if this is really for people at the beginning of their journey, and it's a book that I would pass to others. So if I have friends or family who are asking questions about investment for the first time, they're wanting to make a difference to their own financial situation, this is probably the first book I would recommend. Now, if you're a bit further on with your investment journey, you might not learn a lot from this, but it's still worth picking up. And Rob, you can read this book in a day. It's like one of those books that you could just fly through. It's written in a really clever way, like Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's told in stories, so they're really digestible. But if you haven't invested in property yet, or maybe you've only done one investment and this is all new to you still, this book is a great foundational book to read. Will it be earth-shattering if you're an established investor? Maybe not, but I still think it's worth a read because then you can recommend it to others. So buy it, read it in a day, and then pass it on to someone who will benefit from it. So Richest Man in Babylon by George Samuel Clayson, absolute classic, a true classic. It's an old book now, but it's a goodie. Do go and read it.
Well, if I'm telling myself any stories, give myself any excuses about why I can't read this book, I'll just reread this next one first. Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. This feels a bit out of place at first because all these other classics are investing books, but I've touched on it before. As an investor, you need the right mindset. And my goodness, does anyone have a mindset like David Goggins? We devoted a whole episode of the show to this book back in episode 325. And if you don't know, David Goggins basically had a ridiculously hard life, was in a really bad place, turned it around, became a Navy SEAL, and has gone on to do the most ludicrous things like the hardest ultramarathons in the world, breaking the pull-up world record. Basically, any reason you're telling yourself why you can't do something, read or listen to this book and realise you've got no excuses. You do have to be a bit careful if you might stand up and start like throwing sun loungers around and getting a bit excited. It does get you really pumped up. But there are lots of motivational books out there. And for me, this is the most motivational of them all. It's an incredible story, very well told.
If you see someone poolside doing press-ups randomly in the middle of the day, it's probably because they're listening to that book or they're reading it. It's that type of book. It's brilliant. Okay, so they are our classics. Rich Dad Poor Dad, Richer, Wiser, Happier, Price of Money, Richest Man in Babylon, Can't Hurt Me. A great collection. If you haven't read any of those yet, go and read them. But let's give you some new stuff. Rob, I'm quite excited by this because there's books in here that I've not read yet because they're your recommendations, and I'm sure vice versa. So let's start with A $1 Billion Whale. This is by Tom Wright and Bradley Hope. I still struggle to believe this is a true story. This book is about fraud and deception on another level. It's so vast and so audacious that I do still struggle, having read it, to contemplate how someone had the audacity to even think of doing this, never mind doing it. It's just absolutely crazy what this guy does. I'm not going to give too much away, but I'll give you one little tidbit because then you get an idea. So The Wolf of Wall Street, another great book, by the way. If you've not read that, it's not officially on our list, but go and read it. The book was made into a film, and the film is very good as well. Leonardo DiCaprio stars in it. Now, it's a great film, but it's a film about deception and fraud. But what is crazy is the man behind this fraud, or the main character behind this fraud, is a man called Joe Lowe. And Joe Lowe financed this film through his own fraud. So this film needed over $100 million to get going and be produced. And he was the one who lent the money. It's absolutely crazy. That is just one of 100, maybe 1,000 different things this guy did. It is truly staggering. It's one of those books that people will be looking at you as your poolside because your jaw's on the ground going, what's wrong? It's that type of book. Highly recommend it. It's just a crazy read. But because it's so crazy, it's hard to believe.
That sounds like the perfect summer read. That sounds like really good fun. And clearly Amazon's algorithm's been doing its job because it's been putting that in front of me many times, but I've never actually gone ahead and bought it. So I will be doing that now. So that sounds like a great summer read. You know what else is great to do when you're sitting by the pool relaxing? Read about tax. That's what I like to do. And that's why I'm recommending this book, Taxtopia, by The Rebel Accountant. You know, it's going to be juicy because he's given a pseudonym. He can't reveal his real identity. But that's because this book is part autobiography and part expose, I guess, of just how bonkers the tax system is and how the wealthiest people take advantage of it. So especially as we've had an election recently, you'll have heard all the stuff about how the wealthiest companies get away without paying any tax. If you're like moderately well off, you have to pay inheritance tax, but the very richest don't pay it, all that kind of thing and far more. This book explains how they do it and also gives you an insight into some of the characters and the schemes and the industry that exists off the back of the tax system because it is so ludicrously complicated and open to anything from exploiting a loophole to out and out abuse. But the reason I really love this book is that it's not in any way academic or dry or even angry. It's really funny. It's written in exactly the same way that I try to write, which is explaining things really simply so it's effortless and making some jokes and being a bit funny. But it does a better job of that than I do, which is quite irritating. But it really is an excellent book because you'll learn a load of stuff, you'll understand more about how this world works, and you'll laugh a lot along the way. So that is Taxtopia by The Rebel Accountant.
Next on the list is The Great CEO Within. And this is a true business book. This is a business book to help you become a great CEO. I'm still on that journey, but wanting to improve myself as a leader. This is a book that I've really enjoyed reading. And you don't have to be a CEO, a leader of any sort, whether aspiring leader or someone who is a leader already. You can absolutely get a lot from this book. And the business owners as well, whether it's you by yourself or you've got a really big team, again, another book worth reading. I've read a lot of business books over the years, more than I can remember, and most of them are very samey, a lot, just the same sort of lessons put in different ways. What I liked about this book, it was fresh. There was new stuff in here. There was stuff that made me think, and there was stuff that changed the way I worked. And when you come across a book like that, it's like, okay, this is good. Fresh stuff, yeah, that's great, but actually stuff that makes you change the way you behave and approach your own business, that's a really, really good book. So if you work in a business in a leadership position or you own a business, The Great CEO Within is a great book. Check it out.
Okay, my next one is a book that I have mentioned before, but I will mention it again, and I will keep mentioning it until it's in the classics section, because I believe this book is on its way to being a classic, and if it's not, then there is something very wrong with the world, because that book is Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. And the reason I recommend this book to pretty much everyone I ever talk to is one of those, much like Rich Dad Poor Dad, where it takes something that should be really obvious, but isn't, and makes you go, oh, I'm doing this all wrong. And where the title comes in is that Bill Perkins says the ideal should be to die with zero money in the bank. You give up your life energy and your time to earn money. You should use that money to improve your life and help out the people and the causes that you care about. And if you've done that perfectly, if you've given up the optimum amount of your life to get money and you've spent that money in the optimum way, you should die with zero. Obviously, in practice, it's not quite that neat, but the way that he frames it, the way that he demonstrates where most people go wrong, it is so powerful. And there's so many things that you do, that I do, that everyone does, that just seems normal, but when you think about it for a minute, make absolutely zero sense. And this book cuts through it all very, very quickly. It's a super quick read as well. And like with Rich Dad Poor Dad, that's a book that's provoked a lot of change in a lot of people. This book has caused me to change a lot of things. And surely that's the measure of a great self-help, self-improvement kind of book. So that is Die With Zero by Bill Perkins.
And last but certainly not least is a book not like any other in this list. It's a funny, light-hearted, good for your soul book. And I can't quite remember how I came across this book. I know somebody recommended it to me because it's not the type of book I would normally pick up. Now, this person recommended it as an audiobook. Whoever this person is, if you're a podcast listener, thank you. Please do get in touch if you were the one who recommended it to me. But the book is called Free Country by George Mahood. And it's definitely one for Audible. Is it the greatest written book ever? No, far from it. The way it's written, sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, that's not amazing. But the story and the feel-good factor you get from this story is brilliant. The book is about two friends who start at Land's End in Union Jack boxer shorts and travel the length of the country by bike. But they don't start with any bikes, they don't start with any money, and they're not allowed to spend money at all during the journey. So they have to get from Land's End to John O'Groats with no money, no clothes other than their underpants, no board, they've got no tents, anything like that. So they have to get all their board, all their food, all their transport for free. They can't take lifts, they have to get there by themselves under their own steam. So it's a bike or walking. It's just a great story, and it's a beautiful story because it just reminds you about how many great, quirky people there are in this country. Over the last year or so, probably a bit longer, I felt a bit negative about our country, if I'm being really honest, and it's not something I would share freely, but hey-ho, I've just done it with tens of thousands. But this book reminded me about the goodness of our country, the goodness of our people. And there are so many wonderful characters and humans in this country that don't get the limelight. And this book, this journey that these two gentlemen go on, they're quirky in themselves, absolutely. I mean, to go on that journey, you have to be a bit nuts. But the people they encounter and the interactions they have with these people is just beautiful. It just reminds me of the human spirit. It reminds me about how wonderful this country is. It really left me in a positive place. The narrator of this book, it's not the author, the narrator of this book is brilliant. He does a great job of it. So something to make you smile and feel uplifted poolside and occasionally make you laugh as well. Free Country by George Mahood is my audiobook recommendation this summer.
Oh, that does sound really, really good. Sounds like a perfect summer read. So, Rob, that's the list. If we haven't planned this, I'm going to put you on the spot. You're packing your suitcase. You've only got room for one of these books. Which one are you taking away with you?
Well, I'm going to pick Taxtopia because I've not read it, so I'll pick that as my first choice. But if I had to reread one of these books, I would probably go with Richer, Wiser, Happier in the classics because I really enjoyed that book. And learning from billionaires, I mean, that's such a rare thing to be able to do. The access that William Green has is, unprecedented to be able to speak to all these billionaires. So I personally took a lot from that book as an investor, and I think a reread would be worthwhile. But Taxtopia, because it's new, and if I had to reread one, Richer, Wiser, Happier. What about you?
Yeah, I think similar logic. I would probably go with Free Country because it sounds uplifting, sounds like a lot of fun. I really like the sound of that. But then...
Go on, say it, your own book.
Found
in all good bookshops.
I'm reading that thing again. No, I think I would... I'm torn between two... I don't know whether to go Rich Dad Poor Dad or Die With Zero, because both I've read multiple times and both are really short. And I feel like when you've got a bit of free time, there's a lot to be said for like not just reading, but reflecting. So I think I'd like to read a chapter of one of those books and then go for a walk, ponder it, let it sink in, think about how to apply the lessons. So I think maybe a little bit less reading and more reflecting and thinking about how to put it into action.
Well, all these books will be listed in our show notes, so make sure you take advantage of them. Some brilliant, brilliant reads there. I can tell you the list of books that have not made the list is a lot longer. I could do a podcast on books that were a bit rubbish, but that's a bit of a negative podcast. And I would have a long list. There's a lot of rubbish books out there, but these are the best. These are the ones that we are happy to share. So do go and check them out if you haven't already. And enjoy your summer holidays. Now, you think we've done our job with giving you extra, but no, we've got another Hub Extra, and it's linked very much to today's episode. So a reminder, you can get audiobooks now on Spotify, and that is worthy of a Hub Extra of its own, because most people are paying for Spotify already. So to be able to take advantage of your subscription and download extra books, then great. But you may find, like producer Dan and myself, that you go to Spotify and then suddenly you find yourself back on Audible as well, because you don't quite get everything you want from Spotify. Well, good news for you. If you do already have Audible, you cancel because you've started to use Spotify, you will find you're presented with some very good offers to return to Audible. So go and try Spotify out, cancel your Audible, even if you don't want to cancel it, because you will be offered a reason to come back. So even if you're perfectly happy with Audible and you don't want to try Spotify, just do it, and then you will get some incentives. The incentives being some extra downloads made available to you. That is our Hub Extra this week.
Cool. Well, that is us done. That's your summer holiday sorted. So we will leave it there. Just before we do, though, a quick shout out to listener Gavin, who, speaking of books, has been in touch to say, I bought your book, The Price of Money, and it was a real eye-opener and pushed me to make the leap. Along with listening to the podcast and your YouTube shows, I built a strategy, made a plan, and I'm buying my first buy-to-let right now. Well, that is brilliant to hear. Well done to you, Gavin. We provide the information, but you have to actually go out and do it. Most people do not, and you did. So well done to you. That really is us done for this week. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back to do it all again next week. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.